Welcome to your weekly dose of NFL Jibber Jabber, the Club Dub Football Podcast. Remember to follow on Twitter, Insta, and watch video shows each week on YouTube. Want to get in touch? That's easy. Message through social or email clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
Welcome to the Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
The guys are ready, so let's hand over to Rob Rose, JB, PB and Aldrin, and get on with the show.
Hi gents.
Hi Rob.
We're back again, and we should say after our lovely voiceover introduction, minus PB this week. He's otherwise engaged, but very much in our thoughts, and we look forward to having him back for recording in 7 days' time. But don't worry, the three of us that remain will absolutely fill your podcast time with rip-roaring content, as we usually do. And before we roll in to our picks for this week of NFL action, I wanted to, as usual, whip around our virtual room and get an idea of who you think stood out in the last week of NFL action, and what, if any, were the big takeaways and surprises. Aldrin, I'm coming over to you first. What do you think?
I think there's a few teams that are becoming the teams that we thought they might have been. You know, I think the Texans have pretty much turned into the bottom of the basement team that we all expected. The Ravens are looking very much like the Super Bowl contenders that they could be. And then I guess there's a few, I don't know, middling ones. There was a few where maybe they had a bit of a rocky week. I'm thinking Chargers particularly. I know I've just mentioned the Ravens as being the team that are looking like the team we expect them to be. But equally, I thought, we talked about it last week. That game could have gone either way. You know, the Chargers could have won or the Ravens could have won. But I think we all expected it to be competitive when in actual fact, I think the head coach of the Chargers summed it up pretty well when he said, you know, we were outplayed, we were outcoached, and we were just roundly beaten. You know, and I think that's maybe not something you expect when you think of how the Chargers have been this year. You know, they've looked like a really competitive team. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to dwell on the London games because I unfortunately didn't get to go. So I'm going to let you boys talk about that a bit. But again, that was another great spectacle. So yeah, all in all, I think it was another great week, and I think you're starting to settle into the groove of where teams might end up now.
I love your points. Brandon Staley's honesty about the Chargers is in fact going to echo a point I'm going to make, because Dan Campbell is on my hit list for what do you do when your team are 0-5, struggling to get together? Well, what you do is you stand in front of the nation's press and fundamentally pick off your starters one by one, particularly focusing on probably the best player you have in your quarterback. But yeah, more on the Lions to come in a moment. JB, throw us your standouts, and as Aldrin says, you and I can maybe pick out bits of the London game too.
I mean, the spectacle from the London game, with absolute respect to everybody who took part in what was actually quite a gripping and interesting game, was Jackson DeVille jumping off the top of the stadium, because what an absolute mental case that is. And I know it's one of the weird things where we see him do it kind of every year, and every year you still watch him do it and think, well, he's not actually going to do it, is he? Or her? We don't actually know who's in that. Sorry. I think my point was actually also going to be about the Lions as well. So apologies if I'm, as I have done on occasion, I'm about to take Rob's point. But I was just chatting today with one of the guys who used to work out of our New York office, who is a Lions fan. He went to the Giants Rams game at the weekend just to actually watch Matt Stafford play, because he can't go and see the Lions, so he might as well go and see Stafford, and was kind of gutted for the fact that Stafford had 4 touchdowns and didn't play for the fourth quarter. So yeah, my point was probably kind of going to be along Rob's, of just, I don't know what they're doing in Detroit, but it's not working. Really not working.
The weird thing is, I mean, we talked about it in the off season, didn't we, about how the Lions aren't a year away, they're 2 years away. And they're not there by accident. They're there through the decisions they've made, the fact they're going to get picks, that start kicking in for the trade with Stafford and Goff and so on. And even in this year's draft, you felt that they were taking a much longer term view. Now, I don't mind that. I think that's different to, sucking for picks or, all these things that you see, teams throwing it in the tank to get the number 1, number 2, number 3 pick or so on. I think that considered view from where they are and the uphill climb they had to be competitive this season anyway, kind of felt the sensible choice. I don't think Dan Campbell is an NFL caliber head coach. I think he has had moments when he's come in as an interim coach. But do you know what? The biggest problem I think I have with Dan Campbell is he seems to see the game as a fan. He seems to manage games far too emotionally. And the thing about seeing it as a fan is there's a reason we're all in the stands and we don't coach NFL football teams, right? There is a certain element. There was that famous phrase, wasn't it? If you listen to the fans too much, soon enough, you'll be joining them, and it's that whole feel. And for me, what he did in that press conference on Sunday, on the one hand, I think Dan Campbell thinks he's helping his players. I don't think it's without consideration that he goes, Jared Goff needs to do more. He needs to take more on his shoulders. There are other players who need to improve around him, but we need more from our quarterback. It just feels like the conversation you have in the car on the way home, right? It just feels like a chat that shouldn't be coming from a head coach who ultimately, if he is given time to see through that project, I just think that's a huge error of judgment. I think the Lions are in a way no different from the Texans. I think the Texans not helped by the fact that they've lost Tyrod Taylor. I think we saw that actually they were pretty well coached in building. The problem is that the Lions just seem to be freewheeling. I mean, it really does seem to be out of control there. So for me, that was just a remarkable takeaway.
Well, I think one of the things that you have to look at when you're building an NFL franchise, you have to look at cohesion, and you have to look at that across everywhere. One of the reasons the Steelers have been struggling is because it's essentially a completely new offensive line. Those guys haven't found the cohesion of working together. It's starting to improve and it's starting to get better, and that's good. You want your defense to work well together. Like we have talked about on occasions, is your D-line good so your cornerbacks look better, or are your cornerbacks really good so your D-line looks better? It's all of those kinds of things. And one of the big things teams need to survive is cohesion across kind of the 3 big points, which is general manager building the team, head coach coaching the team, and then quarterback running the team, essentially. And if we look at kind of like when I started watching, like the Browns were a joke, the Buccaneers were a joke. And we're now looking at, from the Browns case, they took a bit of time to get their front office sorted. And they took a bit of time to find their quarterback, and they took a bit of time to find the right coach to pair all of it together. And I think what we saw last year, what we've seen, like, not running away with it. The Browns are 3-3, but the Browns are 3-3, having lost to 3 really good teams. It's not like the Browns of old where they're getting blown out by absolutely everybody. And part of that comes from the work they've put in. It's the same with the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers were a bit of a joke. You bring in a respected, very good head coach like Bruce Arians. You pair him up with the greatest quarterback of all time, and all of a sudden the Buccaneers are really, really good. Who would have thought? The Lions, we talked about this a little bit at the game, on the way to the game last week as well, with the Jets. Teams like that just don't appear to be getting it right at all. The Dan Campbell hire for the Lions rings to me a little bit like when the Browns replaced Hugh Jackson with Freddie Kitchens. It was like, oh, he's a good guy. The team like him. Yeah, but is he actually any good for the job? And like Dan Campbell's got a lot of heart. He's got a lot of fire in him. You believe that he will fire up the players and get them to play well, but is he any good at actually doing the rest of it? Like, they traded for Jared Goff, and we talked about it in the preseason, but I'm sorry, they traded a good quarterback for a not as good quarterback. That is what they did, and Stafford is proving that in Los Angeles. So You're saying like the Lions are 2 years away. I don't even think they're 2 years away. And unless they can sort this out, they are infinite away from being successful.
So that was kind of my point. I mean, I think you're right. I think the plan was that they were always going to be 2 years away. You know, they were always putting, with the Goff trade, a lot of capital in next year's draft, and it just hasn't happened. I mean, I think you know what side of the argument I fall on. Let's not pretend that Jared Goff didn't have 4 touchdown games against really bad teams when he was a Ram. I mean, he made the Super Bowl with them. So I'm in agreement that I think Matt Stafford is a slightly better quarterback, but I don't think Jared Goff is your issue. When, you know, the next point I'm going to make briefly to wrap up last week was the Titans. And the Titans have had their problems. You know, the Titans haven't looked the team we maybe thought they would through the early part of the season, but ultimately they've got game winners. You know, they've got players who actually in the last 2 or 3 minutes of games can make things happen and can do things, and you can count them. There's probably enough talent there to, you know, count 5 players just off the top of your head who can make things happen. You know, whether it's Tannehill, obviously the best running back in the game, some good wide receivers, and you know, they've got cornerbacks that can maybe, you know, help you get things like turnovers. Give me a game winner in Detroit. You know, give me somebody who has that ability. Because if I was a Lions fan, I'm just not sure I'm going out and buying a jersey this season. You know, there's nobody I feel good enough about to put their name on my back. And if Dan Campbell didn't know that going into the season and feels this is a plan, then yeah, I think maybe there's a bit more trouble there than maybe even I thought a few weeks ago. Last thing I've said, I'll mention it, the Titans point. We have been treated to some absolutely brilliant Monday night football, probably even adding Thursday night football. Prime time games this year have delivered and delivered and delivered. And do you know what? I think to imagine the Titans are the kind of team that can compete with the best in the AFC based on what I saw last night, absolutely turns that conversation on its head in the AFC for me. Titans, Chargers, do you know what? Maybe it's not as set in stone as I thought it was 7 days ago. But if that recaps last week, let's start looking ahead. A lot of the same teams involved in our big games. And Aldrin, I am throwing over to you, sir, to talk us through your game of the week.
Yeah, so my game is going to be the Chiefs against those aforementioned Titans, because I think suddenly this becomes a really interesting and potentially close game. I think exactly to your point just there, you know, the Titans put on a real show and were really competitive against what I think we all roundly agree is one of the best teams in the league, against the Bills. So I was kind of, on paper, when I was looking at my predictions before last night, I was thinking, you know, the Chiefs got a bit of their mojo back the other day. They started to look a bit better. You know, they're always going to put up big points on offense, so that's never been a worry. And I didn't maybe have the same hope for the Titans. You know, you thought their defense hasn't looked maybe as robust as it has in previous years. The offense is a bit spluttering if you can hole up Derrick Henry a little bit. And then, yeah, kind of last night blew all my points out of the water, really, because they did get Derrick Henry rolling. Their defense did come up with some big time stops. And I'm not just talking about the last play stop, which was a brilliant play, and maybe a little bit of luck and a bit of fortune in there as well with the slip from Allen. But I think throughout the game, they held the Bills to field goals where other teams haven't held them to field goals. You know, there's other teams where they folded and Allen finds the end zone and he finds Knox or Singletary or, you know, any myriad of players. But in actuality, I think the Titans bottled them up pretty well. You know, I know it was a 30 plus points for each team game, but still, I thought they did a decent job against one of the more potent offenses in the league. And they did their own basics well. You know, I don't think it was a stellar night for Tannehill, but ultimately, I don't think you ever really get stellar nights from Tannehill, if I'm being honest. In, you know, the last couple of years when he's orchestrated that Titans offense, he's not the star. You know, he moves everything efficiently and gives it to his playmakers to make those plays, but he's not the galvanizing star. But certainly I think Derrick Henry looks impossible to stop. And I would be very fearful if I was that Chiefs defense, which has been, porous to say the least this year, coming up against a back in as good a form as he is. I think that's his third or fourth game over 100 yards, multiple touchdowns. And if you'd watched that 76-yard run he broke off last night, you would think nobody's going to stop him. That guy is an absolute monster, coupled with ridiculous pace. So I think the Chiefs have got to find a way to stop him. Most particularly, I think AJ Brown hasn't really come into the mix yet for the Titans. He came and got involved with a few more plays last night, but not enough really from what you would term as your star receiver, really. So I think if they can bottle up Henry, then you really limit what the Titans can do. But equally, I think the Titans are going to have a real challenge to go in, to basically go to the breach again and come up against a really potent offense and try and stifle them. So I'm intrigued to see how it goes, because I think it could end up being a bit of a shootout, really.
This is a very different conversation. It's a very different game to watch than it was before yesterday. And I realise I think we've said that about a lot of games this season so far. I think we all had the Bills last week. We all expected the Bills to carry on and kind of steamroll the Titans. And as the Titans seem to do a lot when in kind of the Mike Vrabel era, they kind of had their backs against the wall and realised, we need to go through this wall. Here you go, Derek. And just kind of just let him go. And yeah, that Derrick Henry against that Chiefs defense, I think is something that's going to be like fun to watch if you're a Titan, and not necessarily great to watch if you're a Chiefs fan. There were flashes at the weekend of kind of what that Chiefs offense can do. Like Mahomes was pulling off some more unbelievable scrambles, running across to one side of the field and then throwing it to the other side while cooking an omelette and dancing the hula and stuff. But this season for the Chiefs definitely feels like what we had potentially thought about at the beginning. The Buccaneers have given teams the blueprint for dealing with the Chiefs, and everyone is now kind of looking at that and following it. And some are doing it better than others, which explains kind of the off and on kind of momentum that the Chiefs are building. They need a proper statement win, and maybe even not one. I think they need a series of them to really show we're not slipping, we're not sliding. Like the talk of like, is Mahomes as good as we thought he was? Yes, absolutely. Of course he is. He's having a bit of a rough patch. Every quarterback has it. You know, you talk about you have your second season shake and everything like that, which Mahomes didn't have. So maybe this is just finally like fate and everything finally catching up with him. From the Titans' point of view, again, the Titans, like a lot of teams, have been hot and cold. They were hot on Monday night. What are they going to be like this weekend? And can they really put a stamp on it and say, no, we are the absolute class of this division. We have got all of the pieces to progress further in the playoffs like people were expecting. And now we're going to start to show it as well. Much like a Derrick Henry game of the Titans rather taking a little bit of time to warm up, and now they're absolutely going for it.
I think most impressive is they kept up with the Bills, who still played quite well. I thought the ability the Titans had to answer to Buffalo's scores were great. And it was one of those games where, as I was watching, you know, you get to halftime and you kind of think, wow, that's halftime. You know, you felt like the first half, you know, there was no pickup. There was no these teams hitting their stride. They were playing hard from the very first down. And I think that was the most impressive thing from the Titans. I mean, to beat the Bills on an off day is one thing. To beat the Bills with some real big playability and some really, you know, in the trenches football, you know, winning battles at the line and things like that, it definitely changed my opinion of where the Titans could be. The Chiefs, I think, is maybe I see that slightly differently. I think the thing the Chiefs have this season that they didn't have last season, I don't think they need statement wins necessarily. I just think they need to cut out mistakes. Mahomes has already got, 7 interceptions so far this season, already more than he got in the whole of last season. I think they are taking time to get up and running, which against the very best in the AFC or even the NFL could find them wanting. And I think the weird thing is that I don't think we're talking about a team in turmoil, but to see a Chiefs team that could be found out by the very best is kind of something we're not entirely used to. I don't think that feels like the way we would ever have assessed the Chiefs of old. I mean, let's not forget that as much as the Bucs had an awful lot going for them last year, the Bucs got to the Super Bowl through the playoffs as the NFC 6 seed, from memory. And the Chiefs were very much the kind of bookmakers' favorite going in with good reason. And it just feels like, as much as we've seen it in flashes, there's still that feeling, even at this point in the season, that they've not quite managed to iron out the mistakes. And I think you need the Titans to play as they did on Monday night. You need the Titans to maintain that level, but they're up against a Chiefs team who are probably considered more beatable than they were 12 months ago. I don't think they need a statement. I just think they need to clean things up. And I'm speaking more from the offensive side of the ball here ultimately, because Aldrin, your point is right. I don't think defensively they are that stellar, which is why when that offense just has these slight hiccups, all of a sudden games become pretty competitive.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I think it's going to be interesting. I agree with you. I think it feels like there's a bit of a hangover from that Super Bowl, doesn't it? Because they were quite roundly beaten in that game. They weren't as competitive as they would have liked against the Bucs. And I think that's kind of carried into this year. They've lost a number of defensive starters, which certainly hasn't helped, because defense was actually a point they could lean on last year. At least it wasn't letting them down, where I feel like it is this year. But ultimately, I think it's a short week for the Titans, coming off a really bruising, tough game against the Bills. I know they edged it, but it was a slog. So, I mean, my club dub prediction this week is going to lean back towards the Chiefs.
Maybe the Chiefs being in club dub is all the confidence boost they need. Bizarre times though, isn't it? To think a team at their best must fancy their chances against the Chiefs isn't something we could have said for probably the last 2, maybe even 3 seasons. But nice. The Kansas City Chiefs are our first team in club dub this week. And JB, I'm handing over to you for your game of the week so we can discuss who's going to follow them in.
As we were talking about sort of just before we hit record, I think I'm a little bit more down on this week's slate of games than I think everybody else is. I'm looking at it and was kind of thinking, I'm not sure where the drama is. I'm not sure where the excitement is. I mean, I should be enjoying the fact that the Steelers are on bye, so it's a red zone at the very least that I can watch without having to worry about having a heart attack at too young an age. But for my game of the week, I've kind of thought, well, if I can't find a game with an awful lot of drama, let's find a game where we can see if one team can answer potentially the last question that's going to be asked of them this season. This is a team that have proven they can win games big. This is a team that's proven they can win the tightest of games. They can make comebacks and they can squeak out a victory when we need to. This is a team that have won on offense. This is a team that have won thanks to the defense. And this weekend, we need to find out if the undefeated Arizona Cardinals can win the game that potentially they're meant to lose. Because the Texans Cardinals is, to quote a legendary work of fiction, potentially a trap. There have been interesting performances by the Texans. I think they were unlucky to lose the game against the Patriots. I think that was a really good performance that just suffered at the end of it when they weren't able to put it together. So I don't think, for their record, I don't think you can necessarily put the Texans in the same bracket as you could like the Jags or the Jets or someone like that in the AFC. They're frisky. They are definitely looking to make a statement as to what their future is. And it feels an awful lot like the kind of game that the undefeated team would go in and would then lose when everybody's expecting them to win. I know there were concerns last week about the Cardinals going up against the Browns, which I think only increased when Cliff Kingsbury and like every other coach, it felt like, had COVID and couldn't be involved in anything. But despite that, I thought the Cardinals played absolutely exceptionally, overcoming what could have been potentially like season altering ramifications. And we saw last year, again, with the Browns, the very team that they defeated, how that affected their season last year when Stefanski wasn't around. I think Kingsbury not involved didn't seem to slow anything down. The defense was good. I think it was JJ Watt's absolute best game as a Cardinal and really showed that he's still got a heck of a lot left in the tank. You had great performances from all three of the receivers. Christian Kirk, DeAndre Hopkins and AJ Green all had really good games. And the Cards are 6-0 for an absolute reason. And they are, I think, the best team in the league at the moment. So they, to my mind, need to go out and really prove that against a Texans team that's going to be tough and a Texans team that in the past could have seen some serious damage done to that momentum that teams want to build.
So I'll say the Cardinals are certainly an impressive team this year compared to Cardinals teams in years gone by. And as a very partisan and passionate fan of the Cards, I think one of the things that's most impressive is just how they're able to overcome adversity. I think if you look at moments like that 109-yard return for the Jags, the Hail Mary at the weekend against the Browns, there have been kind of other similar moments. One of the things that seems really impressive about this team is they've got the ability to go and shift that momentum. They've got the ability to go and put drives together that do great things. I mean, I watched the game on Sunday thinking actually the Cardinals were a bit wasteful, particularly in the red zone. You know, you thought, oh God, you know, we weren't as disciplined as you'd have wanted to be, a few stupid penalties. Actually, more so than the penalties, having Garcia at center instead of Hudson, it didn't really seem like it was working. There were a few kind of odd, dodgy snaps that Murray had to dive on top of. And yet here's a team that scored 30 plus points and had their superstar quarterback sat on the bench in the fourth quarter. You know, this is a game that very quickly, you know, got out of hand. And, you know, for me, the other point you make is right. I mean, against the 49ers, the Cardinals had 4 fourth down stops. You know, 4 fourth down stops in that game against San Francisco, a team that when you think about fourth and short with Shanahan's offensive mind, you know, you'd fancy them to make things happen, you know, in these tight moments themselves. But it was the Cardinals who kind of won that battle of wills. I don't think we're looking at a Cardinals team that'll maybe make it much beyond 6, 7, 8-0. I don't think we'll be looking at a Cardinals team that gets to the end of the season, you know, what would we be now with the number of games? What, 16-1 or 15-2 or that kind of, I don't think we're looking at that kind of team. But I think the difference between this year and last year is that real sense that both sides of the ball can win you a game. You summed that up beautifully, JB. And also the fact they can beat good teams. You know, a bit like we've just talked about with a few others, the Cardinals last season relied on you having an off day. You know, we're able to capitalize. We're able to do certain big things in big moments, but weren't really consistent Sunday on Sunday. They've definitely moved beyond that. The Texans, I am still, it's bizarre to say it, thinking they are actually slightly better than I thought they would be. In the games where they have had Tyrod Taylor, where the games where they've not fallen behind and they've been able to use the run, things have looked better than I thought. The problem they've got is that, you know, with a rookie quarterback still finding his feet and maybe a bit short of the kind of arm talent that we're seeing from the other rookies in the league who themselves are having plenty of problems, they're just going to be forced to throw the ball by any good defense, by any well-coached team. And when you fall behind and that's what you're left with, I just think they're going to be found wanting. I think they're in a better position than, say, a Lions. But even for me, even considering the banana skin, think the Cardinals will have too much for them this weekend.
I don't know. I just don't agree that the Texans look better than I expected. I think they just look garbage. I know there's been a few bright spots. Occasionally Davis Mills finding Brandon Cooks, and occasionally, Ingram or somebody breaking off a decent run. But there's no consistency there. That happens once in a blue moon. It's plays rather than quarters or phases of games. I just don't. I guess I don't see it. I think Davis Mills is not going to be a starting quarterback in the league. I don't think he, even looks like an average backup. He just looks like a deer in headlights. And I think he's massively overmatched, and he's going to be overmatched against a Cardinals team that is going to just bulldoze him silly.
But that's kind of my point, really. I think he is the problem. For me, I know Deshaun Watson's never going to take another snap, or certainly not this season for the Texans. But I think otherwise, they look well coached. When the defense is on the field for the whole game because they can't move the ball and it's a quarterback who's only capable of 3 and outs, they are closer to righting that ship than I thought they would be. Maybe that's a better description. I think they're a couple of players away. I think you put, say, Jimmy Garoppolo in that offense, and they are instantly better than the Jets, they're already taking a step for me.
I don't know, because I don't know. I don't think quarterback is the sole problem. I know that he's poor, but equally they're just not doing anything in any phase of the game, really. They've run a couple of teams closer, but ultimately they've got that solitary win against the Jags at the start of the season. And that, to me, was the mirage that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. I think that was the game out of the blue, and then they've kind of settled back into it. So I don't know. On the other side, the Cardinals are looking great. I think Murray looks almost unstoppable. The guy is finding dimes down the field, and then when he takes off and runs, I would argue he's more dynamic of a runner than Lamar Jackson even. I think Lamar Jackson's got that heft and that, physicality to him, whereas Kyler Murray's just got that raw kind of pace and athleticism that, you covet really in this type of league now. I think DeAndre Hopkins is head and shoulders above everybody else in the league as a wide receiver. If I'm being honest, if I was picking out the best receiver in the league, it's him. I think he showed that again at the weekend. And I just think, as a Colts fan, I found it incredibly comforting going up against the Texans, knowing that we were at some point going to steamroll them. Again, they kept it relatively close in the first half, but when we got going in the second, we ran them through. And I think the difference with the Cardinals is that the Cardinals will be putting up big points from the very beginning of the game, and that's not going to stop. I think it's JJ Watt's homecoming game. I can see him sacking Mills 3 or 4 times. It could be a bloodbath for him. So I think it's an incredibly impressive team against an incredibly poor team, and I think the game script will go that way. I think it'll be a blowout. Again, I think you might have Kyler Murray sat on the bench in the third quarter if it goes the way I think it might.
Well, I'd love that. I'm not going to argue my point too strongly, but JB, ultimately, this is your choice. Which team find their way into Club Dub? Who could it be?
Just before I reveal the earth-shattering information as to which team are going into Club Dub, I'm going to offer the both of you one of our world-famous bread-based bets. Kyler Murray wins an end-of-season award, be it MVP or Offensive Player of the Year.
I think he could.
He's got to stay healthy. I always worry about that with Murray. It's like you say, he doesn't quite have the body, does he, of a Jackson or I would love him to. Absolutely love him to. I think you've probably got to go back to Carson Palmer, his first full season when we had anyone even close to being a contender on the offensive side of the ball. Yeah, I'm not going to bet against him. As a Cardinals fan, why would I bet against? So no, I think you're probably right. I think is that what you're suggesting, JB?
I'm suggesting that he will.
Okay, I will second your suggestion then, so I will not take that bet. Aldrin, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm not going to take that either because I think there's a high likelihood that he could.
Yeah, I think he... do you know what? I think as a Cardinals fan, I'm not saying it's this year or even next year. I think it's the first time I've looked at the Cardinals on offense and looked at, the Cardinals having a superstar quarterback, maybe ever, or certainly as the Arizona Cardinals, you'd say it's the first time we've had a superstar quarterback. We could get to a Super Bowl with that guy. That's honestly how I think now about Kyler Murray, that he's the kind of talent that could take the Cardinals back to a Super Bowl, not as the surprise package they were, when we were defeated by the Steelers, as a genuine Super Bowl contender. And that I feel like I have to touch wood. I feel like I have to, go through a whole process here. It's such an alien feeling for me as a Cardinals fan, but goodness me, when we picked him 1 overall, little could we have dreamt he would turn into the talent he is. So I think you've got no takers for your bread-based bet, JB, but I like you putting it out there.
Well, you got to throw these things out when you want. And on that note, then I will officially induct the Arizona Cardinals into Club Dub this week.
So it comes down to me, third and final game, and I picked the one that you just couldn't bring yourself to pick, JB, because even if you think this is a poor slate of games, and I think there's competitive games, maybe not blockbuster games, there's one standout still left that you didn't want to go anywhere near, and it's, of course, the Baltimore Ravens against the Cincinnati. The Aaron Partisan coverage is unbeatable. Keep listening, everybody. The Baltimore Ravens against the Cincinnati Bengals. And I tell you what, before I get into ultimately the matchup and the ins and outs, what's the phrase? Change your mind, it proves you've got one. Joe Burrow is having a good year. I didn't see it from him last year. Maybe when you put him up against, what was going on with the Chargers, or I don't know. I just didn't necessarily see what all the hype was about. This season. The second that, yeah, this is it. I just thought it was okay. I didn't think he was the kind of player who looked like he was a bona fide franchise quarterback. And this season, I'm starting to feel different. And here's what I think I've had to do. The thing about Burrow is, minus the odd run and scramble, which I think a lot of quarterbacks can do, he's not got the speed of, say, a Daniel Jones, that deceptive speed. He's not got that escapability. But I tell you what I'm beginning to realize Burrow is week on week, is he's actually quite an old-fashioned quarterback in a way. I think he's the kind of quarterback that in a clean pocket with good players around him can actually do some pretty exciting things. And I think one of the parallels you'd maybe make is maybe a Jared Goff in his Rams era. Put the right talent around him, he can do things. But I'm beginning to think maybe he goes beyond that. I think that relationship with Chase, although interesting to see him have a few drops at the weekend, and that narrative about him not having safe hands, that had really sprung up in the preseason, suddenly being on the tip of every kind of analyst's tongue. I just actually think that if Cincinnati can move forward this season and also through next season, the season after, go into drafts not thinking quarterback, I think this could be a very exciting era for Cincinnati. And the fact that I'm going into this game against a resurgent, talented, well-coached, really kind of, buoyant Ravens team, thinking that this could be an incredibly competitive game and maybe even to call a coin flip game, I think really is a demonstration of great progress for Cincinnati. I think that performance against the Steelers earlier in the year was a very good one, and they have followed it up with other performances that suggest that this is the kind of level they can come out and find each and every Sunday. So for me, Cincinnati being competitive, Cincinnati being physical on defense, maybe they haven't quite got the kind of the show-stopping names that they've got on offense at the moment, but Cincinnati being strong on defense, interesting on offense, is something we haven't been able to say for a very long time. And for a team with a huge playoff drought, with that extra wildcard spot this season, I think maybe they are in with a chance that I'd never have predicted in week one. That said, the Ravens look great. I always love John Harbaugh teams because I've said this before on the podcast. I feel he coaches them up. I said earlier on in the season when I actually predicted the Ravens to lose against the Chiefs, a game they obviously came out and won, that the Ravens don't need to beat the Chiefs in September as it was. They need to just be good enough to beat the Chiefs in January. And I always think that John Harbaugh is the kind of guy that can improve his team. He's got coaches that have year on year done great things with the players at their disposal. Actually, I think we've started to see that already. I think Lamar Jackson, and I know we made a lot of this last week, so I'll move over this very briefly, is suddenly showing that if a team game plans to take away his feet, take away his planned running. I think his running when a play breaks down is a bit different. It's always hard to mitigate against. But if they can take away a planned run, whether it be quarterback or running back, I think we're seeing that they've got the kind of game planning of their own on the offensive side of the ball in Baltimore that means that they can throw and do more interesting things that I didn't necessarily see, a few seasons back. They're able to overturn deficits because of that ability to move the ball through the air. They're able to do things that I think will keep them relevant. And I think if the Bengals are maybe one of those teams that, might just get into the playoffs, every week I look at the Ravens and think they are more and more of a sure thing.
So as the one of the three of us that believed in Joe Burrow from the very beginning, I feel quite happy taking in a small victory lap here about
Feels
how well he's kind of...
I would.
Yeah. It's not often that I get these kinds of things right. Hello, my repeated insistences that Nick Foles was an amazing standout quarterback. Sorry, Nick. So yeah, I'm going to enjoy that one a little bit. And yeah, I think the Bengals have to go down as one of the most surprising teams of the season so far. I think in comparison to how they looked last year, it's night and day. Some of that is adding Chase and making sure that Joe Burrow has that kind of trusted receiving threat that he understands. We talk a lot about that being a quarterback, but with kind of the bond the two of them were able to build in college, I think it's incredible to see it kind of flourish on the NFL field sort of every weekend. And in a sort of a division that features the Steelers, the Browns and the Ravens, I think for the Bengals to be in that kind of position of, like Rob said, contending for, I don't think necessarily just contending for a wild card slot, but defending for kind of a divisional title again is really interesting. It's really good. The Baltimore Ravens will also be in the game.
I can't let you get away with that. A really quick thing for me, I think you're right about Chase, but also what's impressive is they seem well coached and organised, don't they? I've also got to mention Uzama at tight end, I think looks great. Physical attributes, yes. I think game planning for him more. Do you know what? I think the Bengals are starting to make the steps that a lot of teams we've spent time talking about on this podcast have yet to make. You've got to imagine, the hierarchy of what the Lions, the Texans, the Jets, must look at the Bengals and think they are absolutely, trying to copy that mold, trying to copy that recipe. But come on, you've got to give the Ravens more credit than that. Or you don't have to.
The Ravens have been good this year.
Right, Aldrin, help me out with this.
Yeah, I'll be a bit more partisan. I'm totally with you on Burrow. I think I didn't see it last year. I'm still yet to be 100% convinced, don't get me wrong. But I do think he's made a step this year, which is impressive after the sort of injury that he had, particularly in his rookie season. I think certainly he looks more like the college quarterback that was so highly touted. I do think as well, maybe looking back, it was maybe a little bit coloured by just how good Herbert was in his rookie season and, maybe Burrow not living up to that. But equally, Herbert had a better situation. But certainly I think he's made a step this year. He looks really good. Jamar Chase, I think, is an absolute stud. I know he had those couple of drops, but equally, the guy is putting up record-breaking numbers in terms of number of touchdown catches in the early part of his career, and that's what he's paid to do. So I think he's looking impressive. Same as you said, they've got some really good offensive players there. Uzama, Mixon, obviously, is still an absolutely stellar running back in the league. On the flip side, for the Ravens, I think their running game has actually been more impressive than I was expecting. Not having to go through Lamar Jackson, like you kind of touched on. If you take away his designed running plays and force him into making passes, can you try and exploit that? Well, considering they've gone into the season, or certainly the last 3 or 4 games, with an absolutely battered and bruised running back room that's now, I think, what are they down to? Donta Freeman and, a collection of others are actually, as Harbaugh teams do, still running the ball hard, still getting yards, and still keeping defenses honest, which I think is exactly what you want. So yeah, I think oddly it's a very competitive game. The Bengals much better than you expect. The Ravens, I guess maybe the Ravens even a little bit better than you expect because of that challenge that they've had with running backs and a few other positions. So I think ultimately the Ravens look like, well, I said it before, they look like a Super Bowl team in waiting with the way that they're playing and steamrolling good teams. They're just beating everybody that comes in front of them, good, bad, indifferent. So yeah, I think it'll be, I hope that it's competitive because I think it could be a really, really good game between two, what is actually becoming very good teams. But I do think the Ravens will have too much. They look so impressive at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point, dangerous in the playoffs because they can beat anybody, but also making it pretty straightforward to take care of bad teams will get you in the playoffs, with that extra wildcard spot. Like I say, I don't think you need to be much better than that to find your way in. So I've got to pick a winner, and I am going to put, do you know what? I know I made a pick earlier, shared it with you, beginning to doubt myself. I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to put the Baltimore Ravens into Club Dub. So, 3 teams in Club Dub, no PB this week. So sadly, we don't have his insight and input to his 4th, but I'm sure it would have been a blinder. So it means we get to go as a trio and explore this week's hot topic. So after the success of the highly complex true or false feature that we ran last week, I'm going to go on a similar theme. I'm going to ask you guys to argue the unarguable. I'm going to give you a statement about an NFL team, player, situation, and you have to argue that the statement I have made is in fact true. You can both chip in on this. And the first one is, in last year's Super Bowl, the Buccaneers and Chiefs battled it out with the then reigning Super Bowl champion Chiefs, headed by Patrick Mahomes. And of course, we all know what Tom Brady has done when put in the big game. But I would like you to both tell me why neither of these guys may find their way back to a Super Bowl again. Argue the unarguable. Off you go, JB.
I mean, we talked a little bit about it in kind of the Chiefs-Titans preview that we talked about. The reason Mahomes is never going to go back to another Super Bowl is the Chiefs need to be a complete team, and are they going to be? The Chiefs have had defensive problems at least since I've been a fan. Like they've had some solid players. Like Justin Houston, sort of towards sort of the end of his career with the Chiefs, was incredible, but they have never had that kind of lights out defense, especially for Mahomes, that we've seen from other like iconic Super Bowl recurring Super Bowl champions, dynasties. That's the word I'm searching for there. You look at the Cowboys, you look at the Steelers, you look at the Patriots.
Ravens?
Yes, in both of the Ravens Super Bowl victories, they came off off of strong defensive performances, but I wouldn't class them as a dynasty, is why I wasn't going for them. In the same way that you wouldn't talk about the Chicago Bears as a dynasty. Like
no,
the 85
Bears
wouldn't. Yeah, the 85 Bears were potentially the best defense of all time. But anyway, we're getting off the point. They need that to be able to complete. Offense wins games, but defense wins championships. And we saw that in last season's Super Bowl because it was the defense that won the Buccaneers that game. until they can get a defense that matches the incredible offensive talent that they've got, they're going to be in trouble. And that offensive talent isn't always going to be there. So that was the argument I'd make for the Chiefs. Aldrin, do you want to take the Bucks?
Yeah, I'll take the Bucks. It's an easy one. Tom Brady's 104 years old.
But
And
hold
as
on,
soon
hold
as-
on, Aldrin. Since the year 2001, Tom Brady has appeared in half of all Super Bowls. I know he's in his 40s, but you're telling me the guy's never making it again?
Yeah, what? You made the statement and told me to argue it, so I'm giving
Argue
you
the
the argument.
unarguable. I'm just setting you up.
He and that team is old as, and I guess that would be the weakness. That is where ultimately they're going to stumble because, Tom Brady can keep going, but I think at some point that guy's going to get an injury. And then I'm not sure where they go. I think that's the biggest thing for me with Tampa at the minute is that there isn't really a plan B. I think without Tom Brady, obviously, you rely on Tom Brady as teams have done for the last several decades, and you're well assured in that. But equally, I think there is going to be a point where he gets an injury or he just has a bit of a decline and then it goes off a cliff. So that would be my play for that. And until they have a good idea of where they go after Tom, I don't think that they'll get to the Super Bowl. There you go. I mean, this is nonsense because let's be honest, they're gonna.
I love the until they have a plan for what they do after Tom. See the New England Patriots for details.
I was going to say, yeah, I can't wait until
What are you talking
Cam
about?
Newton turns up at the Bucks training camp
just-
next year.
He's old enough.
To speak up for Phil in what I'm sure would be his major contribution to the podcast, the Buccaneers obviously do have a plan B. It's B for Blaine, and just watch as he rips it in.
As a Cardinals
I mean,
fan, I love Blaine Gabbert.
Is Phil a Bucks fan? He never mentions it.
You should have said. So
Kept it quiet.
right. So for those out there in listener land, I should say that when I was pitching this particular segment to you all, that was the example question I gave you. You maybe felt well prepared to argue the inarguable in this case. Here's the next one. In scouring the internet this week, I read an article that said, now Fields is more comfortable and the Bears have found a recipe that works for them on offense. They are playoff bound. Please make the argument for me that the Chicago Bears will be a playoff team this January. Good luck, gentlemen.
All right, can I take the start, JB?
By all means.
Thanks. I guess the only thing that I will lean on is Justin Fields' college tape and his ability. And I think that guy is a big game player. And I don't disagree that he's had his struggles early doors. And let's be brutally honest, most of that is coaching related and situation related in that organization. But equally, I think that guy is an absolute winner. You had Trevor Lawrence touted as this generational quarterback. And ultimately, Justin Fields smoked him in the games they played last year in college. And I think that's what you've got to lean on because Justin Fields is a really great player in the making, I think. And with the right coaching, the right players around him, Allen Robinson is a great weapon to have. So I think if they can get him and keep him rolling, then he is a potentially elite quarterback because he's got what you would want as a prototypical kind of quarterback. He's got a big arm. He's got the ability to move and run. Certainly he needs to get better at scanning the field and finding his targets. But equally, most rookie quarterbacks have that issue. You could have said that about Joe Burrow last year and, we're extolling the virtues of his leap this year. So I would say that you put your faith in Justin Fields being the face of that franchise for a long time. And if they've got this offense that he's now comfortable in and is going to get rolling, then he is the type of player to lead them to a playoffs, more so than Andy Dalton or Nick Foles or whichever carousel of cast-offs they want to roll out as their supposed QB1.
JB, are you bought in on Matt Nagy, Bill Lazor and all things Chicago Bears?
We are in week 7. We have seen worse teams make it to the playoffs. We've seen worse teams make it to the Super Bowl. We've seen worse quarterbacks make it to the Super Bowl. Just shout out to T. Dilfer for an example of that.
God, but heavy on the Baltimore Ravens mentions in the last couple of minutes, JD.
Loves them, can't get enough.
We don't.
Thinks they're a dynasty, Rob. Do you know what I
We
mean?
don't talk about certain teams enough. So I'm just making sure all of our listeners get their fix of the Baltimore Ravens. This is the Bears are a team that if Justin Fields does have an offense that he's comfortable running, they've got noted Club Dub football podcast favorite Allen Robinson.
They do.
They've got a decent defense. It's not the best, but it's also not the worst. And Khalil Mack, after maybe kind of a season of not putting up the numbers expected, is starting to show a little bit more of what he's capable
Quite
of
like
again.
that, D.
And
yeah, I'm with you.
yeah, and
Also, sorry, James, to interrupt because I know it's your point, but you said worse quarterbacks have got to the playoffs. Well, equally, didn't the Bears make the playoffs last year with
Yes,
Mitch
when you said
Trubisky,
worse
Chase
teams,
Daniel and
yeah,
Nick
yeah.
Foles?
Yeah,
Yep.
worst
They
teams that
made
made
it
the
to the
playoffs last
with
year.
worse quarterbacks.
The Bears, the Washington football team last year. Yeah, they'd be the two, I
and
think.
just to just borrow a little bit from Rob's point around the Bengals and the Ravens, there's 7 playoff spots. There's 3 wild cards now, and there's an extra game. So some teams who were like, oh, they just needed one more game to be able to get over the line. Well, that one more game's there now, and you never want to say there's nobody that could make it. But you also know that that's not true, because there are some teams who definitely aren't going to make it. Apologies, New York Jets, Jacksonville Jaguars fans. But I'm not ready to count the Bears out just yet.
I'm not sure you quite argued the unarguable, but you did mention that worse teams have made the Super Bowl. So can I just check, can you imagine the Bears making a Super Bowl, JB?
Absolutely not. But that was not the question that was
All right,
asked.
yeah.
The question was, could they make the playoffs?
So-
yes. Teams that go out in the wild card round still make the playoffs.
Right. So what if I said to you that if that question felt tricky, these were just warm-ups. These were just preludes to the main event. Please
Literally,
argue.
I've never seen you this happy before.
Well, indeed.
Recording this podcast.
Please
What a tease.
This is for our dear friend Nick. I think he'll particularly love this one, because the last argue the unarguable I'm going to throw out there is, after another crushing defeat this week, Robert Kraft comes to the realization that it was in fact Tom Brady carrying the franchise, and that he has to make the heartbreaking decision to show Bill Belichick the door. Please argue the unarguable to say that the New England Patriots should fire the most successful head coach in the history of the NFL and move on from the defensive mastermind that is Bill.
So the popular phrasing is, you can fool all of the people some of the time, or some of the people all the time. And I don't think Bill Belichick has ever fooled anybody, except maybe opposing quarterbacks when he's drawing up the defense. But there is an element of nobody is good forever. Nobody is at the top of their game forever. There eventually comes to a point where every person, in whatever their hobbies are, whatever their interests are, whatever their chosen profession is, reaches the point of, I have gone as far as I can go. I can take this no further. Bill Belichick would, by no means be the first coach that's happened to. Don Shula coached an undefeated team. Don Shula has, I think, still the most wins for a head coach ever. And even he got to the point of, I just can't do this anymore. Chuck Noll had one of the best teams of the 70s. And by kind of the end of the 80s was just, haven't got this anymore. Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, we're talking about quarterbacks, all of them got to a point of just, my body is not letting me carry on and do this. So saying Bill Belichick, who by now has been the head coach of the Patriots for 21 years, I think it's his 21st season, not adding into it kind of the years in the Super Bowls with the Giants, the times with the Browns, the times back working with Bill Parcells for the Jets, etc. There has to come a point where Bill Belichick just reaches the end of what he is able to do. And you kind of look at it and just think, well, is the Patriot way still the way of doing things? The Patriot way was the prototype that kind of a lot of media talking heads and that were saying that's the blueprint that you want to follow. And now what we're seeing is much more creative teams with a lot more freedom and players with a lot more freedom of expression that kind of flies in the face of that Patriots way of doing it. You're looking at kind of whiz kids like your Kyle Shanahans and your Sean McVays and maybe even your Brandon Staley's. Let's not go too far with all of that, but ultimately on what we've seen so far, definitely in, I think, the consideration for possible great coach there. And you've got to look at that and kind of think, well, have we reached the end of the road here? And is it best for the franchise if maybe everybody moves on and potentially does something different?
You've got to argue it though. I want you to tell me that Robert Kraft needs to swing that axe. Robert Kraft needs to do it. He's got no chance of the glory days returning. Go on, Aldrin. Go on. I need it. I need that bold statement.
Well, I think the big thing is this year they've won 2 games out of 6, right? The teams they beat were the Jets and the Texans. Well, to be blunt, everybody's going to beat those this year. They're terrible. They've lost all 4 home games. And I don't know, the quarterback situation hasn't been well managed for me. I think the whole Cam Newton situation was bizarre. You know, give him a new deal, draft Mac Jones, who personally I don't massively rate. I've said that enough. And I don't know. I just think the way that organization's managed is odd. You know, you let your elite cornerback Gilmore leave, and then you're not getting the return on the play that the other players that you've kept in and around there. I think it's very hard-headed to think that your way is the only way and to be completely inflexible in that. And I think that's maybe where the Patriots are stuck. I think they're very fortunate to be second in their division, and it's only because, again, the Jets are in that division, who are terrible, and the Dolphins are just having a really under par year. But ultimately, they could come back and get rolling again. They've still got talent on both sides of the ball that they could turn things around. I just think, and I thought it going into this year, I think last year showed that Brady was the reason that team was such a successful organization. Let's not mince our words. I think Brady proved that. I don't know that Bill Belichick's going to get any better in the forthcoming years with that organization. I think they had the opportunity this year to go out, spend the money, get the players, and give all the weapons around them that you could possibly want, and they're underperforming. So I don't know where you think he's going to get better in the next few years as he gets older and more hard-headed. So there you go, Rob. You wanted contentious and argumentative, and there you go. I loved it. The Patriots are terrible. They need to sack him.
The fact that Bill Belichick, probably the greatest defensive mind of a generation, if not more, maybe ever, who created game plans in Super Bowls, the likes of which the world has never seen. You have just described him as a guy who was carried by Tom Brady. I just love it. I love it. Thank you for arguing. I did. I asked you to argue the unarguable, and my goodness me, did we. So that rounds out our hot topic this week. 3 beautifully argued points. Sadly, the things we didn't get round to was Kirk Cousins lifting the Lombardi. That would have been 4th if we'd have had time. But do you know what?
Sorry,
maybe we save that for
never going to happen. Tune in
everybody for next week's Argue the Inarguable, where James tells you why Kirk Cousins will lift the Super Bowl as the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. Yeah, maybe a slightly bigger stretch even than the Bears, but right. I still like I think the Vikings are too old on defense, but otherwise I think there's a lot of good things going on there. But anyway, before I digress, JB, let's throw over to you. So, we pick them each week. And for those of you listening, you can follow us on social to see what we pick. And I will say, did all 4 of us pick the Jags to win in London?
I argued it last week and said the Jags will win, but I wrote the Dolphins because I'm an idiot. So I had a terrible week pricking the wrong teams.
Well, I think when 3 out of 4 even, and don't beat yourself up here, Aldrin, when 3 out of 4 of us go for a team without a win and somehow, end up coming out of that smelling, I just think that's the kind of punditry you don't find everywhere. So I think we should stand tall with a great sense of pride. But go on, whip us through the runners and riders with last week's Pick'em games and Club Dub selections. How did it all work out?
Well, of the people who are on the podcast this week,
that's the way we should go.
It was a tie between JB and Rob. Again, both of us were 11-3. Unfortunately, the participant that hasn't unfortunately been able to join us today went 12-2, only failing on the Cardinals and the Browns.
Wow.
And the Monday Night Football game.
Wow.
That would just be, as Phil has pointed out, that would make him undefeated up until the evening slate of games. Aldrin, unfortunately, bringing up the rear with 8-6, but
had a stinker, picked all of the wrong teams, most notably the Jags, even though I said the Jags would win. Great work.
It's one of those ones that if everything had gone right, it would have been a spectacular victory. So that now puts us in overall standings of Rob with 2, Phil with 2, and that's 2 in a row, and JB and Aldrin both with 1 each.
Well, I think having just talked about Bill Belichick, didn't he coin the famous phrase, no days off? I'm not sure we should reward people who don't turn up to record podcasts. I think it's a challenge there. But you know what? We'll let him have this one. Maybe we'll add penalties later in the season. So myself and Phil on 2, you guys on 1. It's just hotting up. Like I say, you can find them on social. Do follow us. Do chip in with your own. And otherwise, gentlemen, let's come back in 7 days. The other side of what I think is a very interesting slate of NFL games, even if I'm on my own there. Aldrin, are you with me? I think an interesting slate, right? I think JB.
I'm with you. Yeah, I like him.
Yeah, JB's maybe the only one who's down on this. After an interesting slate of games coming this weekend, let's come back and do it all again. Gents, thanks for your company. It was wonderful as always.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.